That behavior in Parliament was indicative of the way Starmer has behaved in the constituency, the way he's run the Labour Party, and the way I believe he will run the country. So I actually believe that he is a threat to the democracy of the United Kingdom. And those factors altogether, I suppose, have tipped me over the edge. And when I say we want to show that politics can be done differently, it's very easy to establish what my political views are. I do countless videos and have done for years. I write books, I've made films. I'm going to be in this campaign what I've always been. I'm going to be true to my views that I've held for a long, long time. I'm not going to change my views to suit certain people or because the Labour Party, in all likelihood, will run a very dirty campaign. I'm not going to sink to that level. I'm going to be true to the principles that I've always held politically, and the principles that are fundamental to my identity. So it's not a campaign about me. It's a campaign about the broadest possible community in Holborn and St. Pancras. And I hope that it is also a campaign that is important locally, but also has national impact because it is Keir Starmer who I'm standing against.
And if you were, you are somebody that knew Nelson Mandela very well. If you were to look at him as a leader and Keir Starmer as a leader, we both were politically and emotionally invested in the Corbyn project. We both did a lot, both locally and nationally, to try and bring that to fruition. And we saw all of those hopes and dreams of not only us, but millions of others in the country dashed. And Keir Starmer was a key part of that. If you were to look at his leadership qualities and stand them up next to Nelson Mandela, how would you weigh those up?
Well, first of all, it's important to understand that I was absurdly privileged as a white South African who had experienced nothing but privilege from the apartheid system because of the color of my skin, to have played any role, a minute role, in the struggle to liberate South Africa from apartheid and in the early years of our democracy. I cannot tell you how honored and privileged I feel to have done that. And I did nothing in my life to deserve that, to be honest with you. And so to have actually worked for Mandela as an MP under him, to have spent time with him in meetings and occasionally, very occasionally, one-on-one, I regard him as one of the greatest statesmen of the last century, certainly the post-World War II period. And what characterized him? Everything that Mandela did was based on the principle that he would treat every single human being he came into contact with as his equal and with the respect with which he wanted to be treated. And that included his prison warders. He learned Afrikaans so that he could, which was the language of the oppressor, so that he could communicate in their own language with his prison warders. And they adored the man, even though they were imprisoning him. He had a humility, an integrity, an honesty. I'll never forget one of the first interviews he did after coming out of prison, quite a few years before he became president. He traveled to the US for a variety of purposes and was grilled on national television, on the big networks. And they said to him things like, how can you be friends with Gaddafi? How can you be friends with Cuba? And he just didn't flinch. He said, and he would say the same thing to everybody. It didn't matter who was asking the question. His views remained the same. He was incredibly consistent. He said, when I was jailed by the apartheid system, my comrades who had managed to flee came to the United States of America and they told this country, the government, what it was we needed for our liberation. And we got nothing. So we went to Libya, we went to Cuba, we went to Sweden, we went to the Soviet Union, and we told them what we needed. And we got everything we asked for. And he said, you have to remember, the enemies of the United States are not our enemies. And then he was asked about his views on Israel, which he and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who I was also fortunate enough to know, described not just as an apartheid state, but an apartheid state worse than the South African state had been, repeated his views. And he said, why would I befriend a state that I, someone who has experienced the worst of apartheid, recognize as an apartheid state? Why would I praise a country that was probably the most important ally of my oppressors, who helped my oppressors become a nuclear power? And I mean, I think the hosts, famous people like Ted Koppel were quite shocked at this honesty and that someone hadn't just bent their message because of the audience. So let me take that person who I knew and who I loved and who has been a huge inspiration for my life from a very young age, and compare him to Keir Starmer, who wants to be Prime Minister of Great Britain. Arrogance, changes his mind as soon as it suits his political purpose, driven almost entirely by personal ambition, has no vision, no political program that is discernible from anything he's ever said, became leader of the Labour Party on the basis of lies, 10 pledges that mimicked what Jeremy Corbyn had offered the country, which he immediately reneged on. And then in Corbyn himself, someone who he'd called a friend when he was in his shadow cabinet and who he'd been proud to serve under, in his own words, as soon as he was leader, he vilified him and has effectively, he's excluded him from the Labour whip in Parliament. He's done everything in his power to push him out of the party. So this is a person who adjusts their opinions, their views, their ideologies, their worldview on what will get him what he wants. And what he wants is to be Prime Minister of Great Britain. What he's always wanted is to be Prime Minister of Great Britain. But if we look at his record when he headed the Crown Prosecution Service, if we look at the way he's behaved in our constituency, drumming out anybody with progressive views from any of the branches, let's bear in mind that Keir Starmer has expelled more Jews from the Labour Party, supposedly to combat anti-Semitism, than in the entire history of the party before him. This would be like expelling Nelson Mandela from the ANC in order to combat racism. I mean, it's that insane. And he actually thinks people are going to believe this, that what he's doing is correct. Of course, there have been all sorts of non-Jewish people who've also been kicked out of the party on all sorts of spurious grounds. I'm not saying there's never been anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I would argue there's probably been a lot less anti-Semitism in the Labour Party than there's ever been in the Tory party or in UKIP and those various other manifestations of the right wing. But this is the measure of the man. These instincts are undemocratic, anti-democratic, and authoritarian. And I really fear that if this man becomes Prime Minister of Great Britain, we will find our civil rights, our rights to protest, the rights to open political speech and activity could be severely, severely curtailed.